those who have been receiving the 350 Rand social relief of distress grants during the state of disaster will have to reapply, and many will no longer qualify for the grant at all. New regulations gazetted last week require that qualifying applicants must be poorer than previously stipulated. Social justice organizations have labeled the move inhumane and regressive and say it will leave millions of people below the food poverty line. For more on this, let's bring in then the hashtag Pay the Grants SA activist, Shaira Kala. Shaira, good evening. Thank you for your time. So I've looked at this government gazette published by Minister Lindiwe Zulu on the 22nd of April, and it seeks to basically move the payment of the social relief of distress grant from the previous dispensation, which was under the national state of disaster, into now the act that has to do with social relief being provided to people. So what about these regulations concerns you?
Yeah, it's the devil is always in the details, and I think what's most concerning to us is that the technicalities in this new regulation clearly point to the fact that, civil society partners have not been listened to in this process. We were asked for comment and we sent comment through, and it's very clear that those points that we were giving to government on how to improve the process of applications and how to expand support when support is genuinely needed to be expanded, it just sort of flew past government. And now what we're seeing is that there's a deliberate attempt by government, by the DSD, to work within the 44 billion rand that Treasury has set aside for the SRD. And to do that, they need to deliberately exclude people who should be eligible to receive this grant. So one thing that has been very alarming, for example, is that the criteria to get the support included an income threshold of 595 Rand, which was in itself very low. It was below the food poverty line of 624 Rand. And now that income threshold has been further decreased to 350 Rand. So the government is going to use surveillance to constantly check people's bank accounts to make sure that they're poorer than the poorest to be able to receive this support. And that means that if you have anything above 350 Rand, you will not get this support. That would include hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. And so that's one of the biggest problems that we have. But also what we're seeing is that the April payments were not made. And we know that what happened in KZN also was a further indication of how desperate people are across the country, but particularly in KZN. And many people did not receive the April payments. The new regulations state that if you do not apply under these new regulations by the 15th of that month, then you will not get you will not be considered. Now look at the date. We're one day away from Freedom Day, and this is a major unfreedom in the exclusionary, violent way in which people who should be receiving support, the most vulnerable, those who have been displaced to the edges of our society, are being denied the basic, meager support as low as 350 Rand, but it has been making a major impact on people's lives. It has been a lifeline, and it has shown how important the social relief is and the positive effects of it. So why are we seeing government not honoring what the president had announced in the SONA, that this relief would be extended? And we're also not seeing any commitment to what will happen after the expiry of this temporary extension in March 2023. We're seeing a government that is sauntering around while people are starving with no urgency as to the permanent support that we need to be enabling here. And we as civil society stand ready. We have communicated with government, but we're not being given the same respect. And more importantly, the claimants themselves are left in the dark. There's no communication. There's no transparency.
Do you believe that it's about not showing respect to yourselves as well as the recipients, Shaira, than it is about perhaps this being a reverse gear of sorts? Because for a while, it looked, at least to me, like the SRD 350 Rand grant was sort of being teased out as a potential foundation for a future basic income grant. But it seems to me that with this move, this is perhaps, putting it into reverse gear to say, actually, hang on, we may not be able to afford this. It may simply be a matter of affordability.
Yes, this is a massive regression. Even for Treasury to be capping the amount set aside for this grant at 44 billion, when we know that, the current criteria before this or the previous criteria rather, before these new regulations was exclusionary, that millions of people who should have been eligible were being rejected when they applied. Even with the knowledge of that, and even the knowledge that the criteria for the income threshold was far too low, we're still seeing no understanding of the reality on the ground. I mean, we've done our calculations, and at a 75% uptake rate, if we're thinking about the population of South Africans below the food poverty line, which could be around 15 million, at a 75% uptake, we would need we would need about 60 billion rand. Now, this 44 billion rand is really far too low. And what's also disturbing is the fact that, we have 10.5 million people currently receiving the grant. And now you're making the criteria to receive it even more stringent, even more difficult to meet. So there's clearly a deliberate attempt to exclude people while saying, oh, we're extending the relief. And this is highly disingenuous. It's pure evil.
Lastly then, Shaira, you surely share the concern that government has about what they like to call leakages in the system, whereby people who simply should not be getting this grant are getting it. Well, not just this grant, but any kind of social grant. You always have people who are able to cheat the system and end up finding themselves getting paid out. I know of stories, for instance, of people who are actually residents and citizens of neighboring countries who are said to come into South Africa once a month because they were able to present themselves and, given the situation we have with corruption and got ID documents and registered, et cetera, et cetera. So this requirement for people to reapply and the constant surveillance, someone will say, it's simply to close those loopholes such that you don't have those leakages, such that then you can have more and more people who are deserving benefiting from what's already a limited resource. What do you say to that argument?
I think the leakages have nothing to do with the surveillance. I think the leakages are a problem because our government does suffer from a major case of corrupt activity in every sense of the word. And Amabungane has done a very good investigative journalism around what's happening in SASSA and Postbank and the ways in which that needs to be addressed. I'm completely on the same page with you, but we can't conflate the two issues. By surveilling people who are poor and who should be getting support, and finding ways to exclude them because you need to meet a particular budgetary requirement that is based on an austerity that we simply cannot afford right now, given that we are the most unequal country in the world. That to me is highly disturbing. And the SRD grant of 350 is a tiny amount, but its impact is massively positive. If we look at who actually has been receiving it, most of the people who've been receiving it are the poorest of the poor. So we need to expand support and find ways to close the gaps in terms of corruption, bribery. A lot of those activities that you mentioned are happening not through the surveillance, but rather through the officials within SASSA not being held accountable for gaps in the system that are clearly there to conveniently pocket money that should be going to the poorest of the poor. So we need to not get distracted about the real issue here.
Yeah. Yeah, all right. I've got to thank you for that. Thank you, Shaira Kalla, weighing in on this situation around the new regulations that have to do with the payment of the Social Relief of Distress Grant, 350 Rand. Concerns there from civil society that many people who should be getting the grant will now be excluded, particularly seeing as the threshold has been moved down from 595 being the maximum that you have as a form of income as a person. Previously, you were at 595 Rand per month. You are now at 350 Rand per month. So if you earn 350 Rand and below per month, you'll be eligible. And that excludes a whole lot of people.